Good evening all and welcome to Paranormal Week. I have a huge collection of scary, ghosty stories for you all week long. So let me give you the rundown because it's the first day. We've got Ouija stories tonight, followed by medium stories tomorrow. Please tune in, they're actually really good. Haunted house stories on April Fools. Funeral home stories on Thursday, paranormal stories on Friday, and extending it with demons on Saturday for the big finish. I am so hyped for this week. I hope you guys tune in to every episode and really hope to see you there. Don't forget that we also have a podcast, and I've launched some haunted house stories over there to commemorate Paranormal Week. But enough from me. It's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. Let me tell you a story about one of my teachers. She was very jokey in her lessons, never took herself too seriously, and was genuinely good at her job. Maybe that's why everyone respected her, and the class loved her. That's why the abrupt change in her tone the day Ouija boards came up cut through the room like ice. One minute she was all laughing and joking and lecturing, and the next her face went flat and told us she needed to share something that happened when she was our age. So back in high school, she and a group of her friends had gathered one weekend at someone's house. It was a typical teenage night. Someone remembered the old Ouija board tucked in a closet. So they all sat around a low table, fingers resting on the planchette, and giggling as they asked the usual questions. The answers that came back were strange and vague, but they kept going, half creeped out and half amused. My teacher said she felt unsettled by some of the replies, as if the board knew more about them than it should, but no one wanted to chicken out. Eventually, one of the group decided to push things further. Against her better judgment, someone asked the question everyone tells you not to ask. When will I die? The planchette began to move, slowly at first, then with more confidence, stopping in front of numbers. It went around in a circle, giving each person an age. Most of them received answers in their 70s or 80s, ages that felt distant and almost comforting, like a promise of a long life. Laughter returned. It felt harmless again. Maybe the board was just feeding them what they wanted to hear. It was then one girl's turn. Her number came up as 19. 19 was right around the corner for them. They were juniors and seniors at the time, standing on the edge of adulthood. My teacher said the girl tried to laugh it off, but her smile never reached her eyes. The others reassured her it was nonsense, that someone must have been doing it as a joke, and they ended the session not long after, packed the board away and tried to forget it ever happened. A few years later, life moved on. Graduation, friendships drifted apart as everyone went over to college. The news started spreading through their circle, though, that same girl, the one who had been given 19, was on spring break with a friend, walking along the beach at night, when out of nowhere, a car left the road and struck them. Her friend survived with a serious leg injury, but she didn't make it. She was 19 years old, just 1 week shy of her 20th birthday. My teacher said that detail was what made it unbearable. The way the board's answer clung so close to reality, yet left just enough space for her to almost escape it. She had nearly defied it, nearly crossed into a new decade. And then the accident happened. The nature of death, random yet precise. It left my teacher with the feeling that something had followed that prediction into the future and waited for its moment to strike. By the time she finished telling us, all the chatter in the classroom had vanished. She looked at us in the eye and said she would never touch a Ouija board again, and that if any of us ever considered it, we should think long and hard about the kind of questions we ask and the answers we might get. Safe to say, hearing it was more than enough for me. My name is Ayla, and I wanted to share this story that happened back when I was a 23-year-old woman living in Baku, Azerbaijan, with my 2 older cousins, Fatima of 25 and Aysel of 27. Now, we had heard stories about spirit boards at uni, and students spoke about contacting the dead. At the time, of course, it seemed utterly ridiculous. But I will not deny that curiosity got the better of us, and the idea took hold, and we decided to try it for ourselves. We opted to make a Ouija board akin to those they use in the West. It didn't marry up perfectly with the Azerbaijan alphabet, but we were happy with the result. Of course, the three of us heavily doubted that anything would happen at all, and thought it would just be some silly fun, and we'd laugh and there'd be nothing happening. Well, we agreed to meet at my aunt's house, and the day came, and we met in her narrow apartment in the old Yasamal district. Our board was made of wood, and we placed a small, polished stone as the planchette, and lit a single cypress-scented candle. Even though it was daytime, we were still slightly unnerved, and no one wanted to be the first one to touch the stone, even though we thought it was all innocuous. For extra context, it just so happened that a young man from our neighborhood called Elnor had recently drowned in a tragic boating accident out at sea. His body was never recovered, and he was the person we decided to try and contact. I was the first to reach out, and then my cousin followed. We called out Elnor's name repeatedly, our voices echoing off the concrete walls as we waited to see what would happen. Nothing did. For ages. Just the distant call to prayer from a nearby mosque could be heard, mingling with the steady hum of traffic from below. But we persisted, our fingers hovering lightly over the stone, unwilling to give it up completely just yet. Finally, the stone twitched and excitement surged through us. I glanced at Fatima and Aysel, their eyes wide in excitement. We all looked at each other and confirmed that none of us were pushing it. The stone seemed to glide effortlessly across the board, as if by phantom hands. We asked the spirit's name, and it spelled out Elnor perfectly, letter by letter. Some background here. After hearing about his accident, I had listened to the neighbors recount his life. He had a signature phrase which translates roughly to, "The sea calls me." It's a poetic line from a folk song about Baku's fishermen. Anyway, on a whim, I asked if the spirit knew it, and the stone moved without pause, spelling out the exact 6 words flawlessly. And shock hit me hard. My cousins, bear in mind, barely knew Elnor, let alone his signature phrase, so I was speechless. If one of them was manipulating the stone, there's no way they could have made this up on the fly. Emboldened, we delved deeper, asking about his final moments on the boat. At first, responses flowed smoothly, describing the rough waves and a sudden fog that swallowed the vessel. But gradually, Elnor's replies grew fragmented, and the stone kept jerking in fits before stopping entirely, and the room fell silent again. So we paused for tea, took a short break, and returned. This time a different presence emerged, and gave no name, but there was a vague sense of dread in not being able to put a name to whatever was guiding us this time. So we tried lightening the mood with playful questions about future sweethearts, exam results at uni, and even results for local football matches. We all laughed and giggled, and then for some reason which I still to this day cannot adequately explain, I asked, "Will I live past 30? I looked around. The stone hesitated briefly, then slid decisively to no. Panic clawed at my chest, and I bolted upstairs and went screaming to my aunt and uncle, tears in hand, crying about the prophecy. They comforted me, saying that childish games held no power and urged us to pack it away forever. And that's what we did, burying the board. I swore off spirit boards that night and never looked back. Well, 7 years slipped by and I turned 30, breathing a sigh of relief. My aunt later confessed that my parents had secretly worried, as they remembered their own brushes with jinn summoning rituals in their childhood, and life moved on. I got married, graduated uni, got a job teaching history at a local school, and my days ticked ever on. With the day we played with the board falling deeper into the back of my mind. Then, a year after that, my cousin Fatima perished in a fiery lorry crash on the road to Gobustan. Her car crumpled against a petrol tanker hauling fuel from the offshore rigs. All three of us had touched the stone that night. Perhaps the energies crossed, the message intended for her path instead of mine. Coincidence? Maybe. But after Elner spelled his phrase, denying the existence of the supernatural became impossible. Do fates weave themselves together before birth with spirits peering along the threads like fortune tellers? I don't know. I do not blame the board for her death or claim it cursed us. Other predictions followed over the years were eerily accurate. I don't know what everyone else makes of it, but to me, this points to a hidden web of connection beyond our sight. And some things are better left untouched and undiscovered. This is a story I've told numerous times whenever people bring up their creepy experiences. It happened when I was 16. I was bored out my mind at my girlfriend's cousin's place one evening. Now, Thai people tend to be quite superstitious, and while I'm only half, my girlfriend, her cousin, and her friend believed deeply in those traditions. With nothing better to do, we decided to make a Ouija board right there. We took a plain piece of printed paper and wrote out the letters of the alphabet in 2 neat rows, numbers from 1 to 9 below them, and yes and no in the corners. For the planchette, we used a small coin from someone's pocket. We spoke politely to any spirits that might be listening in, inviting them to join us if they wished. What happened next unsettled me in a way I can't fully explain. The coin began to move under our fingers almost immediately, gliding quickly and with surprising accuracy across the paper. It spelled out names that sounded like they could belong to future boyfriends or girlfriends for each of us. The movements felt guided by some purpose we couldn't see. I suspected Joey, the most excited one in the group, was subtly pushing it to keep things going, so I blamed him right away, but he laughed it off. But we all wanted proof. We decided to test the board more rigorously. My girlfriend volunteered to be the only one touching the coin directly, while the rest of us, and Joey, rested our fingers on her elbow. We asked her to close her eyes tightly and tilt her face up towards the ceiling away from the board, so no one could claim she was peeking or staring. We started with a few simple questions about everyday things, but the coin stayed still at first. Then my girlfriend screamed. We all jumped back in shock, our chairs scraping loudly against the floor. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, her eyes were still squeezed shut, and her face angled towards the ceiling as if held by an invisible force. Her hand moved on its own across the paper, slamming the coin repeatedly to spell out stop. Her body trembled. She wanted nothing more than to look down, to rip her hand away and run from the table, but something was keeping her pinned. This went on for an agonizing 30 seconds, the coin scraping harshly against the paper. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Her hand fell limp, and she collapsed forwards, gasping for breath. We tore the paper into tiny pieces right then and stuffed it down the toilet, and flushing it away. We sat in stunned silence for a long time. My girlfriend wiped her face and explained that her body had not belonged to her in that moment. She had fought against the movement with all her strength, but it was no use. That night changed me forever. I had always been skeptical about ghost stories, dismissing them as imagination, but this felt too real to ignore. I think the unknown exists out there, and I haven't used a Ouija board since, and strongly advise anyone who uses one to stay well clear of it and think twice before getting involved in spiritual affairs they cannot understand. I have tried to forget this story over the years, and I cannot recall every single detail, but I remember a few key exchanges clearly. What happened to me afterwards is burnt into my memory. The people involved were my brother Nick, my sister-in-law Brittany, her friend Ashley, and my girlfriend at the time Katie. So here's a step-by-step account of what occurred. Let me take you back to the summer of 2010. That year I developed a strong fascination with the paranormal. The idea that ghosts and demons might be real excited me deeply, sending my adrenaline surging whenever I encountered stories or shows about them. It felt thrilling, and one particular night my sister-in-law Brittany asked if I had ever used a Ouija board. At the time I had no idea what it even was, so she could tell right away that I had never tried one. She explained how it worked, describing the board with its letters, numbers, yes/no sections, and the planchette that moves to spell out messages from beyond. Her eyes lit up as she spoke about it, and asked if I wanted to experience it for myself. My heart skipped a beat at the thought. How could I say no to something so intriguing? We decided to do it that very night, but I needed a location where no one would stop us. Brittany's parents would not allow it in their house. My brother and she were only dating then, living under strict rules, so we ruled that out immediately. My brother and I figured our parents' place might work instead. They would never permit it inside the house, but the back porch or garage seemed like a safe bet, out of sight and away from prying eyes. We drove over there quickly. The summer air warm and buzzing with crickets, and on the back porch we gathered supplies, some candles for atmosphere, matches, pen and paper for Brittany to jot down replies, and a few chairs pulled around a wooden table. We sat down and placed our hands over the makeshift Ouija board we drew on paper, since we did not possess a real one. My heart pounded in my chest so fast I could feel it in my throat. Was this actually going to work? I wondered. My fingers barely grazing the planchette, Brittany took charge, placing one hand on it as well while keeping the other free to write. She started asking if any friendly spirits were around and would like to communicate with us. The planchette slid to no, and I freaked out internally. I was hardly touching the thing, my fingers hovering with just a paper thin gap between them and the planchette. I demanded to know who was moving it, telling them to stop it, because I was not having time for games like these. Everyone swore they weren't doing it. Nick, Katie, Ashley, all of them insisted they wanted it to work as much as I did. Brittany even asked Nick directly if he was joking around, and he firmly denied it. Her voice was serious, and she stated clearly that only benevolent entities were welcome. Any violent or harmful ones needed to leave, or we would end the session right there. We waited a few tense minutes, hands hovering over the planchette, watching the candle flames flicker, and Brittany repeated her question. Were there any spirits here tonight that wanted to communicate? Slowly, the planchette dragged itself over to yes. We wondered if this entity was telling the truth or trying to trick us, but curiosity won out, so we pressed on. Brittany asked if it wanted to speak to anyone in particular. The planchette moved swiftly to yes and returned to the center on its own. Something spirits sometimes do when they control movement fully, or so I've been told. She inquired who it wanted first, and it spelled out Ashley, letter by letter. Ashley tensed up immediately and asked why her specifically. I understood her nerves. It would unsettle anyone to be singled out like that, and Brittany advised her to ask a question only a relative would know, something an imposter couldn't guess. Ashley hesitated, then asked what year the spirit had died, assuming it had lived as a human. I cannot recall the exact year it spelled out, but Ashley gasped as it matched the year her mother passed away. Tears welled in her eyes, a mixture of both grief and astonishment, and she grew ever more engaged, asking personal questions only her mum could answer. None of us knew the details, yet the responses were accurate. Questions about her favorite childhood memories, a private family joke, and the like. Ashley believed she was truly connecting, and to test it further, we experimented by lifting fingers one by one. With 3 of us, then 2, then just Ashley with her finger on it. It still glided and responded. Whatever this was had a powerful link to her. It spelled how thankful it felt that Ashley had found Brittany, that her mother never truly left her side, and was glad she had a genuine friend who cared deeply. We spent over an hour, maybe 2, focused on Ashley's session, her voice breaking with the pain. When she felt ready, we thanked the spirit and asked if her mother's presence would stay and watch over us while we invited other friendly spirits. The board responded with yes and then no, then clarifying by spelling evil and good, explaining that the good ones fought the evil away. We expressed deep gratitude to her mother and protectors, asking if she could relay messages from others, and the planchette slid to yes. We took turns after that. Nick went first, foolishly asking how he would die. It spelled age, which he took as old age and dismissed as boring. The girl scolded him. Some questions tempt fate, and you should let life unfold without spoilers, we believe. Katie asked lighter things, random curiosities about her future, and when it was my turn I struggled for ideas, tempted to ask about dying young just to rile them up. Back then, I never expected to live past 18. Life felt short. I asked if my grandfather was okay and had made it to heaven. Yes, and proud came back. Emboldened, I asked if I would become a successful football player, as that year I had offers from the Miami Hurricanes, an old miss dreaming of growing pro. Yes, it said. I was excited now. I clarified if I could, not just would, and asked which offer suited me best. Miss, it spelled. Old Miss, my top choice. But then doubt crept in. Maybe it read my mind. I asked directly if I would make it to Old Miss. No. Crushed, I pressed as to why. Accident, was its reply. What kind, I asked. Yes, to injury. Pissed now, I demanded details, and car was the answer I got. And then, death. The air turned icy, everyone now shifting uneasily, and Brittany sensed a dark energy rising and decided to end it, reminding me some questions crossed the line. A year and a half later, in 2011, during my junior year, the warning hit home. After football season, I took a pizza delivery job to cover my cell bills, gas, and help my parents. One night, well, details are a bit fuzzy because I blacked out, I wrecked badly on US 1, an old Florida highway. Eyewitness told police I rounded the corner at speed with traffic behind me, and slammed subsequently at 75 miles an hour into a Trailblazer's rear, parked halfway in the road by the median. I wasn't wearing a seatbelt, which meant I smashed the windshield and blew out the window with my face. Our cars rebounded, mine nearly plunging into a river. Front end cushioned to the dash, and there was nothing left. And consequently I received a grade 3 concussion, a cantaloupe-sized forehead contusion, torn meniscus, broken leg fractures, torn muscles, and I was in the ICU for 2 weeks and homebound all year, and wheelchair-bound for months due to seizures and head risks. And to no one's surprise, my football career was now gone, and any scholarships had vanished too. I cannot shake the feeling, but do you guys think I sealed my fate by asking? Would it have happened without the query? Anyway, I guess to cut a long story short, don't use Ouija boards, and if you do, just be careful what you ask. I think some things are best not known. When my mum was a first-year university student, she and a group of friends decided to play with a Ouija board in their student room. They didn't have a store-bought one, so they improvised with a homemade board on paper and a shot glass turned upside down. They all sat around a low table and placed their fingers lightly on the base of the glass, forming a circle with their hands, so everyone could feel even the slightest movement. The mood was more playful than serious. They were young and curious and amused by the idea of contacting something out of the ordinary, and no one believed it would work. They started with silly questions. Do you like us? Is anyone here? Are we going to pass our tests? The glass moved a little, spelling out vague words, simple yes-nos. Each time it did, they accused each other of pushing it, and laughing nervously, but of course no one admitted to it. My mum said the odd part was that because their fingers formed a close circle in the glass, any deliberate pressure from one person should be easily felt as a push from that particular direction. Instead, the movement felt oddly smooth, as if the glass was being guided from underneath rather than from any one hand. When it came to her turn, she decided to ask a more personal question, still in a jokey tone. When will I find a boyfriend? She asked, half expecting the glass to sit stubbornly still. To her surprise, it started sliding almost immediately. It moved across the letters and spelled out tomorrow. The room went quiet for a moment as everyone processed it, and she felt sure someone must have been pulling it. But again, in that tight ring of fingers, no one felt like the obvious culprit. Emboldened but uneasy, she asked up a following question. What will his name be? The glass paused and then began to move again. One letter at a time, it spelled Goran. Now, Goran is a fairly common male name in our country, so in theory it could have been a lucky guess, but the way it arrived, smooth and unhesitating, unsettled them. Before anyone could speak or remove their hand, the glass kept going on its own, sliding from letter to letter, without another question being asked, and spelled out, they call him Visoki. In our language, that means the tall one. That was the moment the atmosphere in the room changed completely. The board had not only given a name, but a description too. No one laughed, and the hairs on the back of my mum's neck stood on end. No one wanted to ask anything else after that. They quickly said goodbye, moved the glass off the board and packed everything away. Well, what do you know? The very next night my mum went to a party. It was just a regular student gathering. And of course, a day later, the Ouija incident was completely out of her mind. Well, at some point in the evening, she noticed a very tall guy about 2 meters tall, towering over most of the crowd. He was making his way towards her. The moment she really focused on his height, the memory of the words, they call him the tall one, came crashing back, and her blood ran cold. He introduced himself and tried to start a conversation. Shaken, she cut through the small talk and bluntly asked, Hey, what's your name? He smiled and said, Gordon. Not Goran, but Gordon, off by a single letter. Close enough that in that moment, it felt like the room tilted around her. The board said she would find a boyfriend tomorrow, and now, less than 24 hours later, a man with nearly the exact same name and the exact same physical description was standing right in front of her. She told me that in that moment, shock and fear mixed in a way she had never experienced before. Whether it was fate, or a subconscious suggestion, or something genuinely supernatural, she could never quite make out. But after that, she refused to touch a Ouija board again. And I have no intention of touching one either. I wanted to share a story that happened to me when I was in grade school. I was about 10 years old at the time, and it involved the passing of my great-grandma, someone very close to my sister and me. She lived just a few blocks from our house, so we saw her often, and her absence left a deep void when she died. She had always been fascinated by the paranormal and in her younger days practiced Wicca alongside her younger sister. They shared stories of rituals and spirits that made her seem spooky and mysterious and wise to us kids. And being a figure so beloved, her death devastated us. But just before her funeral, the adults busied themselves with the preparation for said funeral, arranging flowers, sorting clothes and paperwork, etc. My sister and I decided to slip away to her house with 2 of our cousins. We wanted to play and do a little bit of exploring. The house stood solitary, and we used the spare key hidden under a flower pot to let ourselves in, and went down to the basement. We rummaged through her old belongings alongside her witchcraft items until we found an old Ouija board. It was crafted from solid wood with a glossy finish. It looked old, not like the cheap plastic ones they sell nowadays. I remember her once giving us an offhand warning that this was not a game, but we missed her terribly and hoped that maybe she'd forgive our transgression of trying to communicate to her one last time. We carried the board upstairs to the kitchen table, clearing away dishes and setting it down carefully in the middle. We placed our fingers lightly on the old wooden planchette and began asking questions about her, honestly unsure if anything would happen at all. After about 10 minutes, my cousins grew bored and lifted their fingers, saying it was a waste of time, leaving my sister and me to continue. And it was only then that the planchette started moving under our touch and began spelling things. We knew instantly it wasn't her. The responses were menacing, spelling out words like "I will kill you," "murder," and "need blood." Fear gripped us hard, a cold wave that spread from our fingertips to our chest, and in a panic, my sister and I flipped the board face down on the table and flung the planchette across the room. We bolted upstairs to the living room, hearts pounding, leaving our cousins confused, staring at us from the kitchen. They followed us soon after, locking the basement door behind them with a decisive click, and we explained what the board had said, our voices shaking as we relived the terror. They tried to calm us down, suggesting it must have been a trick of the mind or a draft moving the planchette. But of course, we knew better. There's no way it was either of those things. And after some back and forth, my sister and I let ourselves believe it was over. Our parents remained preoccupied with funeral stuff elsewhere, so we agreed to spend the night there together, piling blankets on the living room floor to make a makeshift sleepover. Well, around 2 or 3 in the morning, my cousin sleeping right next to me shook me awake, his face pale. A powerful smell of rotten eggs filled the air. I thought it would soak into my clothes and follow me home, and we lay there frozen for a minute, whispering about what to do, the stench growing stronger with each breath. My sister, always the bold one who preferred facing fears head-on, said she would go check it out if none of us boys wanted to, and we nodded, too scared to argue. She grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and crept through the house, inspecting corners, the basement door, even the stove and fridge for any rotten food. She returned moments later, disappointed but unsurprised. The place was spotless. Convinced there was nothing more we could do, we settled back down and forced our eyes shut, willing sleep to come despite the lingering smell. But not even 30 minutes passed before a deafening crash echoed from somewhere in the room, followed immediately by my cousin's high-pitched scream that pierced the night. I sat up in a blind panic, the other two bolting up right beside me. He was on the floor by the bed, curled up and crying, babbling that cold hands had grabbed his ankle and yanked him off the mattress, right as the crashing noise rang out. The chill of his words matched the sudden drop in temperature we all felt. My other cousin lunged for the main light switch, flooding the room in overhead light. And what we saw next nearly stopped our hearts. There on the hardwood floor, facing directly towards our sleeping spot, lay both the Ouija board and the planchette. Somehow, they had appeared from behind the locked basement. The crash must have been the solid wood slapping against the floorboard. We wasted no time in grabbing our shoes and coats and dashing out the house into the chilly night air, leaving the front door wide open behind us. Barefoot at first, we sprinted a few houses down to our great-aunt's place. She was our great-grandmother's sister, one of the Wicca practitioners, and we pounded on her door, pleading for her to open, until she came down bleary-eyed. Panting, we spilled the whole account, from the basement session to the smell, and now the board's impossible appearance. She didn't say anything but grabbed a small bag and hurried to our great-grandmother's house and told us to stay put. About an hour later she returned. She scolded us firmly for tampering with the board, but not before fixing us cocoa and sandwiches. She explained that playing with it could invite an attachment, something that might lead to possession if not addressed right away. I don't know if she exaggerated for effect, but the terror we felt was entirely real, and I never looked at a Ouija board again after that. Back in high school, I was overweight and gravitated towards outsider groups with extreme views. We dressed in black, listened to death metal, and caused as much trouble as we could, often carrying packs of Parliament cigarettes, like we were rock stars. One particular group drew me in completely. I came to like them very much, trust them, and hand over my innocence to them without much thought. Those friends introduced me to the Ouija board, presenting it as something we needed to explore deeply. Once I agreed, we did not just experiment, but dove in head first. I turned away from my Catholic upbringing and began actively seeking out evil to enhance our sessions, because our early attempts felt typical for beginners. The board moved very little at first. We argued over who might be pushing the planchette, and we had already tried all our usual haunted locations like graveyards and abandoned buildings. I brought a satanic mantra to the group, and they welcomed it during a session at my friend Cody's house. We were tired of sneaking into remote places, so his dad's kitchen table became our spot. We placed the board there, gathered around with our hands on the planchette, and chanted together, "Archangel, dark angel, lend me thy light, through death's veil until we have heaven in sight." We repeated it 6 times, paused, and 6 times again, paused, and 6 more times. That was a terrible mistake, one that ignited years of torment. What follows are the events from our subsequent sessions with the board, the disturbances in that house, and the effects that I have dealt with ever since. The board transformed into a source of constant activity. No matter who touched it or how lightly we placed our fingers, it responded quickly and clearly, spelling out full sentences in proper English. It shifted between wondrous messages and crude insults without warning. For instance, in 2016 it told me Barack Obama would become president of the USA, long before his party had even chosen a nominee. It also predicted that by 2012 the world would end because of his actions. The board spoke at length about salvation, warning that certain friends would die young or suffer greatly, that those with faith like me might find a path to heaven if we made specific changes in our lives, and it exposed our deepest fears about why we may not reach it. It told me directly that I needed to stop premarital sex or have no chance at all, something I worried privately about at the time. How could it know that? It also claimed some friends were doomed to burn eternally, with no hope regardless of their actions. We had gone looking for demons or famous evil entities, from Lucifer to Anton LaVey and Aleister Crowley, and the board delivered them in different forms. It described hell's greatest irony. The best and worst parts were both eternal slavery. Cody thrived on the rush and brought a new higher quality board. With that one we pushed further. It is hard to admit, but I once played a backwards recording of the Lord's Prayer during a session. The planchette darted between yes and no faster than we could react, and the responses grew hostile and darker. One afternoon, we invited additional friends I knew well. We started with the usual tests, questions it should not know the answer to, flipping it off for us to spell it back, and once they saw the power we had unleashed, a friend named Jordan grew skeptical and agitated. "This cannot be real, you must be moving it," he said. To prove his point, he placed the Bible he carried for comfort right on the table. The planchette immediately spelled out one of the most unforgettable messages. "Take the Bible off the table, or I will burn the house down." And we all reacted in shock and panic, and Jordan refused to move it. And the house did not burn down, but the consequences came in other forms. Cody's house was turned into a place of genuine strangeness. As I mentioned, it attracted a rotating crowd of moochers who treated it like their own home, crashing on couches while Cody's dad worked out of town most of the time. One regular player who stayed over often stopped coming because he kept seeing a stark, white face glaring at him through the window. Cody barely slept there, waking from vivid nightmares. In 1 at 3 a.m., a time known for supernatural activity, he felt overwhelming unease, followed by haunting moans and a mass of hands reaching over the bed as if to drag him down. The worst reaction came from a close friend I foolishly introduced to it. After a session, we drove around discussing what happened. Midway, he fell silent. I waited for a response and heard strange, labored breathing. He was panting like a dog, slumped in the passenger seat with one hand gripped on the overhead handle, as if frozen. When I pulled over to check on him, touching his arm only made it worse. Terrified, I drove straight to the local Catholic church and pulled him out onto the sidewalk in front of a statue of the Virgin Mary. He writhed on the ground, but eventually snapped out of it, completely disoriented. I still wonder if it was a prank or something real, but either way, it shook me deeply. Around that time, I became more withdrawn and angry. I avoided classmates and resented anyone popular or well-liked. I dove into occult research, downloading works by Aleister Crowley, Anton LaVey, and H.P. Lovecraft. One day, my mother came down to the basement room, visibly upset but saying little. "Whatever you brought into this house, get it out now. My dreams have turned evil, and I know it's because of you." Bear in mind, I had never told her about the Ouija sessions, but they were affecting her sleep profoundly. That same period brought my first sleep paralysis episode. I woke up unable to move at all. No arm lift, no roll or scream. Even willing a single pinky to twitch failed. It felt oppressively heavy, with faint sounds but no clear visions. Then came an out-of-body sensation, like lucid dreaming while aware my physical body lay still. I seemed to sit up, turn towards the basement doorway and stare. Where 7 stairs should have led up, there was nothing. A pitch-black void moving and breathing like a living cloud. The room around me held a dim, twilight grey, making the contrast stark and terrifying. When I finally lay back down in that state, my body regained control suddenly, as if revived from death. The next day, I deleted all the occult material. 3 years later, as a freshman of Gonzaga University, the nightmares continued. I would wake to find a crucifix in my room, though I owned none, hanging at a sharp right angle, a classic sign of supernatural interference. The present persists, growing stronger whenever I turned towards faith or a holier path. In 2014 it peaked. I accidentally ingested toxic foot spray in my apartment, leaving me dizzy and disoriented, fearing blackout. Desperate for the hospital, I needed my insurance card from work. At the large real estate firm where I worked, I rummaged through my desk and found no card. Realizing it might be in the car, a threatening presence built in the corner behind me. Turning, I glimpsed an expanding black mass radiating pure hate. I stumbled out, leaving every door open, desk, hall, exit, racing to the car as the upstairs hall door clicked shut behind me, and the hospital stabilized me. Soon after, my long-distance relationship collapsed. She admitted cheating, but hauntings plagued her too, over 100 miles away. Dragging sounds outside her room, evil inside the house. One night she called me in panic, asking if I was home, but I wasn't. Midway through describing living room scrapes, she vanished from the line, breathing faintly for minutes before returning in tears. She had a medium sage and blessed the house, clashing with my Catholic roots. Our cat nearly tore through a high-screened window in terror. The medium immediately said I was haunted by my past actions, which I had never mentioned. She confronted me about the satanic music and a specific lyric that had summoned this, the mantra. I still attend church when I can. Supported by a loving relationship that gives me strength, I confessed to use Ouija regularly, hoping for release. But the question that plagues me the most is, will it ever stop haunting me? I have a story about a Ouija board from 15 years ago that shook me so hard I have never touched one since. And as an atheist who does not believe in an afterlife, that's saying something. I share it here because it defies every rational explanation I have ever tried to pin on it, leaving me convinced something unexplainable happened that night. So it was just a casual hangout at my house with a good friend called John and a few girls who showed up with beer and snacks. One of the girls pulls out a Ouija board she had brought along. Nothing fancy. I shrugged it off as harmless fun, girls messing around with ghost stories, while John and I grabbed drinks and shot the breeze about work and sports. We were uninvolved in first. They set it up on the coffee table in the living room and were doing their thing, saying, "Is anyone here? Do you know us?" John and I stayed back, chatting and having our beers, laughing at their exaggerated reactions. Well, halfway through the night, we got hungry, so John and I decided to do a run for pizza, a quick trip to the local spot downtown. We left them to it, figuring they would wrap up or move on to cards or something by the time we got back with food. The drive was uneventful. When we walked back in through the door 20 minutes later, the mood had changed completely. The girls were huddled on the couch, faces pale, eyes wide. They looked flipped out. One of the girls said that the planchette started spelling messages, warning that spirits were watching everyone closely, keeping tabs on what they did next. It felt invasive, and then the board spelled out John, claiming spirits watched him extra close. But they put it Jon. She admitted she doubted at first, thinking no real spirit would misspell a name so badly. It made her question if they were pushing it themselves for laughs, and the room went quiet. John's face drained of color right then. He set the pizza down slowly, pulled out his wallet, and without a word, flipped open his driving license. There it was. His legal name was spelt Jon, short for Jonathan, a quirky family choice he never mentioned to anyone outside of close relatives. And we had no idea. No one in the room knew that detail about him, not the girls, not me, not after years of friendship. He always went by John, full name Jonathan on paper, but that exact spelling really hit me hard. No one laughed it off. How the hell did it know? It could not answer then or now. No prior talks of spelling or wallet checks. From that night on, Ouija boards became off limits in my home, no exceptions. I cannot explain it rationally, but it forced me to question everything. Spirits watching John close? Coincidence does not cut it when the proof sits in his wallet. If you have theories, I'm all ears. It must have been during high school when I decided to try a Ouija board with a few friends, an experience that seemed harmless at the time, but now haunts me. We were at my house one afternoon, curious about the stories we had heard from older kids at the school. None of us had a real Ouija board, so we made one ourselves, drawing the alphabet in 2 rows across a large piece of cardboard, adding numbers from 0 to 9 underneath, and yes and no in the corners as well as goodbye. For the planchette, we used an old shot glass turned upside down. We gathered around the kitchen table and placed our fingers lightly on the glass and began asking simple questions, just like future crushes or exam grades, to see if anything would happen at all. The glass started to move almost right away, slowly gliding across the cardboard with a faint scraping sound. It spelled out answers that felt somewhat credible, like names we recognized from school and vague predictions about weekends, but nothing frightening or dramatic. We laughed nervously between questions, convinced one of us was subtly influencing the shot glass, but we all promised we wouldn't do it. The session lasted maybe 30 minutes before we grew bored and pushed the board aside, folding the cardboard and tossing the glass into the sink, as if it had all been a silly game. Looking back now, I realize how naive we were. We never properly closed the session with a formal goodbye, never invited only spirits to speak or set any boundaries whatsoever. We just stopped, leaving whatever door we might have cracked open hanging ajar without a thought. My friends left soon after, joking about the fake responses on their way out the door, and I felt a vague unease settle in and brushed it off as leftover adrenaline. Little did I know that this casual play would tie directly into something far stranger just days later, convincing me beyond doubt that the board had invited something into my home and life. A short time after the Ouija session, my father and brother left the house for the day, heading out on an errand and leaving me completely alone for the first time in weeks. I headed to the kitchen to make myself something simple to eat, a sandwich or whatever I could grab from the fridge. And that's when the knocks started. They came strong and deliberately against my bedroom door, 3 sharp raps in quick succession, loud enough to make the glass vibrate slightly and echo throughout the empty house. My heart jumped immediately, and I felt certain my father or brother had come back for something, tapping to signal their presence before letting themselves inside. It sounded exactly like a human hand. So I rushed to the window, peering out through the curtain into the backyard, expecting to see one of them standing there. But no one was there, just the empty grass. Convinced I had missed them, I checked every window in the house, front and back, sides circling through the rooms. There was still nothing. No footprints in the soft dirt below the window, and probably more obviously, no car pulling down the driveway. I froze in the hallway, trying to make sense of this. It couldn't have been bugs. An insect could never make a noise like that, not multiple sharp knocks in a row. A bird, perhaps? One might crash into the glass by accident, but several targets in the exact same spot in unison seemed absurd, almost comical. The wind? Well, no breeze can do that. I knew the sound my windows made intimately, from years of living there, and the only answer could have been a knock. For over a year afterwards, I obsessed over rational explanations, replaying the moment in my head. I researched window acoustics, animal behaviors, even acoustic phenomena, like temperature shifts causing glass to contract and pop. The neighbor lived on the opposite side of the house, and it was too far for the sound to carry. I had pinpointed the source definitely to my bedroom window facing the isolated backyard. The timing gnawed at me the most, as they came right after my brother and father drove off. Then, when piecing together details from old journals and messages, I realized with a chill that this happened squarely within the period when I played with the Ouija board with my friends. The more or less credible answers we got were not random, but a lure, a subtle entry point for something more sinister, which we had allowed to stay in my home. I am convinced now that the board opened a connection, however small, and the knocks were its direct result, a clear sign of whatever made it through, making itself known. I talked it over with those same friends recently, hoping they might recall overlooked details. They just shrugged. I ended up making another Ouija board, started a session and closed it, hoping it would bring about an end to all of this. And I haven't heard anything since then, and I hope I don't have to. I had just returned home from the first summer of my freshman year in college. My parents were going through a bitter divorce, and they both chose to leave the house, abandoning me there by myself. I felt furious, confused, and deeply betrayed, and refused to speak to either of them no matter how much they tried to reach out. I had always hated being alone in that house, even when the family was intact. It carried an unsettling sense that made my skin crawl. Eventually, a foreclosure notice showed up taped to the front door, a final blow that confirmed they had given up on the place, and, in my mind, on me too. With such short notice and no way to cover the costs myself, I arranged to move into an apartment with a few friends. There was a 2 to 3 week waiting list for the complex, so we ended up staying in the house until then. They already knew about some of the strange things I had experienced there over the years, and even in their brief time crashing with me, they witnessed enough odd stuff to understand why I was on edge. Now, I know everyone says never to mess with a Ouija board, but we were bored, and so we improvised and made one, on cardboard. To my friends, it was just a silly game, and they fired off random questions about crushes and future plans, but nothing felt truly frightening or meaningful at first. They mocked the whole thing, treating it like a party trick. But I was uneasy the whole time. A knot formed in my stomach. Having lived in that house for years, I knew its hidden potential, and something told me that whatever energies lingered in there were holding back, waiting for the right provocation. They lost interest and quit after about 20 minutes, which brought me quiet relief. We lingered in the kitchen chatting about the move, when a sharp scraping sound started up from the living room, like glass dragging across rough cardboard. Curiosity pulled us in to investigate, and we found the whiskey glass was sliding across the board on its own. It hit letters in a strange repetitive pattern back and forth. The scraping noise echoed in the quiet house. This was not a playful entity, but more darker. We scrambled for a scrap of paper and wrote down the sequence as it repeated. There are 7. Most people would have bolted right then, but the pull was too strong. We were hooked despite the fear. We gathered around the board again, fingers trembling as we placed them on the board. I gathered my courage and directly asked, "Who or what is 7?" And the glass spelled out, "Bad," pausing briefly before continuing with, "Demons." Chills ran down my spine, but I pressed on, asking who we were speaking to now, and it responded with Gary. My friends had no idea who this was, but I did. Gary had been a family friend, an older man who loved hunting and hiking in the woods behind our property. When he passed over a few years earlier, he requested his ashes be scattered there in a private ceremony, marked only by a small concrete deer statue tucked deep among the trees. In that moment, emotion overwhelmed me. I truly believed Gary was reaching out. The energy in the room surged with intensity, and tears welled up as I asked more questions. The exchange revealed that 7 demons occupied the land, lurking inside the house and on the porch. They were both bad and good spirits present, but evil outnumbered the good, having protected me throughout my childhood without me realizing it. The board shifted midway, connecting us to another presence who gave only his last name, Heichman. It was a common surname in our small town, with several families by that name living nearby. He described dying in a car accident and named the local cemetery where he was buried, confirming details we would check later. Heichman positioned himself as one of the good spirits, actively working to hold back the worse ones. I could hardly believe it. This was validation for questions I had carried since childhood, answers about the shadows that I had sensed for years. Still, one friend grew restless, demanding contact with the bad spirit. He started taunting whatever lurked, ignoring my urgent warnings before I knew exactly what the house could unleash. I lifted my fingers from the glass entirely, refusing to lend my energy to it. He bid farewell to Gary and Heichman, insisting on speaking to something darker. He demanded a name repeatedly. For proof, he placed a cigarette on the board and dared a spirit to knock it off. If it did, he promised his lighter so that it could smoke it. Pure provocation. It worked. The cigarette did not just roll off onto the carpet, it rolled back onto the board, climbing over the edge's rim. We all leaned back, fingers flying off the glass, the room suddenly feeling oppressive. It was at that very moment that lights flickered wildly overhead. The sink turned on with water spraying in full force, and the ceiling fan started to spin. Heavy stomps could be heard from the porch, and doors upstairs began slamming shut, and the familiar shadow figures reappeared on the catwalk and stairs. The house had 5 exterior doors, 1 on each side plus the basement exit, and we reached for the front one first, only to find it stuck, like something gripping the other side. A side door finally gave way, but it slammed behind us with such force it nearly knocked my friend flat. Outside on the porch, footsteps pounded towards us, and we dove off the stairs into the wet grass, scrambling for the cars, as whatever pursued us ran parallel through the dark. We couldn't see it, and crashed at another friend's place that night, and were too wired to sleep despite the exhaustion. Reliving it now, my heart races just as it did then. Returning for our things a few days later was pure dread. The doors were unlocked despite us leaving them open, and inside lay total destruction, with furniture overturned and belongings scattered everywhere. The Ouija board sat untouched in place, cigarettes scented perfectly, and the whiskey glass was resting squarely on the number 7. We grabbed essentials for the apartment and bailed, leaving bulk items behind. I wish I could say it ended there, but residual strangeness followed. The new apartment complex felt modern and safe at first, but odd events piled up, including doors creaking open unaided, cold spots drifting through rooms, and that's when my sleep paralysis began. I would jolt awake to a tall, dark figure silhouetted in my doorway. From then on, solitude felt impossible, and I have not set foot in the older house since clearing out. Foreclosure hit, and it sold at auction to outsiders familiar with the area. And even though I still live nearby, I try to avoid driving anywhere near it so that I don't have to see it directly, because I feel like if I do, something might attach itself to me again, and I'd rather it never do. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed tonight's collection of scary stories. I love me a good Ouija story, and if you liked it, you can sub and let me know and do all the positive stuff that is generally quite good to do. I'd like to give one extra special thank you to my members and patrons whose names you can see on screen right now. And if you would like some cool extra perks, like maybe some cryptid stories on Wednesday, you can, go and check it out. And there are some bonus cemetery stories for free for everyone on Patreon on Friday. So, might be worth doing just for that. But that's it from me, guys. Like I said, I will see you tomorrow with some absolutely banging medium stories. They're going to be good. I hope you join me. About half of you choose not to. Looking at you, Brad. But I do hope the rest of you will come. Trust me, they're good stories. It's all spooky stuff. See you tomorrow, guys. Good night.